Why do the people warning us that artificial intelligence could end humanity seem to be the same ones racing to sell it to us first? One day they're sitting in front of lawmakers, speaking in grave tones about existential risk, ethical collapse, and the need to slow everything down. The next day, they're on stage unveiling a faster, cheaper, more powerful AI product, now available, now scalable, now unavoidable. Stay until the end, because once you see how fear, morality, and profit became entangled in the AI conversation, it changes the way you hear every warning they make. The modern AI story is carefully staged, almost cinematic in its repetition. It opens in rooms designed to look serious. Wood-paneled halls, flags behind polished desks, senators leaning forward as if the future just walked into the room uninvited. The people speaking know exactly where to pause, where to lower their voices, where to let a phrase like human extinction or loss of control hang in the air long enough for the cameras to catch it. This is the language of responsibility, of reluctant guardians burdened by knowledge the rest of us don't fully understand. News headlines follow immediately. Tech leaders warn of AI risks. Executives urge urgent regulation. The tone is grave, almost paternal. We are told that something powerful has been unleashed, that restraint is necessary, that society must tread carefully. The imagery reinforces the message. Close-up shots of thoughtful expressions, long pauses, carefully chosen words that signal concern without offering clarity. Fear, but refined. Fear that sounds intelligent. Then almost seamlessly, the scene changes. The lighting gets brighter. The music swells. A keynote stage replaces the hearing room. The same figures now stand confidently before massive screens, clickers in hand, unveiling the future they just warned us about. Faster processing, smarter models, broader integration, tools designed not to be questioned but adopted. The tone shifts from caution to excitement without ever acknowledging the whiplash. The audience applauds. Investors nod. Journalists tweet. The contrast is striking, yet rarely addressed. In one setting, AI is a potential catastrophe that requires immediate oversight. In another, it's an inevitable upgrade you'll fall behind without. The same voices deliver both messages, and somehow the contradiction is treated as nuance rather than conflict. As if warning about danger while accelerating toward it is simply what leadership looks like now. Media coverage smooths over the edges. Morning shows frame the warnings as proof of integrity. Tech columns praise the launches as bold innovation. The two narratives are kept just far enough apart that they never collide in the same article, the same segment, the same conversation. Context is fragmented, parceled out in ways that prevent the audience from seeing the full picture at once. On social platforms, the surface narrative becomes even cleaner. Short clips circulate of dire warnings stripped of follow-up questions. Equally short clips circulate of product demos stripped of ethical debate. Each piece travels alone, detached from the timeline that would reveal how closely these moments overlap. Viewers are encouraged to feel concerned and impressed, often within the same scroll. The aesthetic does most of the persuasion. Serious backdrops communicate trustworthiness. Sleek stages communicate progress. Both rely on authority, not transparency. We are shown confidence, not hesitation, certainty, not doubt. The idea that those building AI are also its most responsible critics is repeated until it feels natural, even comforting. But this polished surface depends on one unspoken agreement: that we won't ask how these moments connect, that we won't question why calls to slow down never seem to delay product launches, that we'll accept fear and acceleration as compatible forces rather than opposing ones. The story works only as long as it stays on the surface, and that surface is designed to feel stable, predictable, reassuring. It invites trust not through explanation, but through repetition. We've seen this image before, so we accept it again. Concern here, innovation there. The cycle continues smooth enough that it barely registers as strange. But beneath that carefully managed image, a deeper pattern is forming, one that has less to do with ethics and far more to do with control over the story itself. Over time, this contradiction doesn't weaken their authority, it strengthens it. The people shaping the AI narrative are no longer framed simply as executives or engineers. They become something closer to moral figures, visionaries burdened by foresight, builders who, unlike everyone else, supposedly understand the monster they've created. The story shifts subtly, they know the danger, and that's why we should trust them. Public relations leans heavily into this framing. Profiles describe sleepless nights, internal debates, moments of doubt. We hear about closed-door meetings where ethics were seriously discussed, about teams devoted to safety, about frameworks that promise responsibility without revealing specifics. The message is clear even when the details aren't. These are not reckless profiteers. These are thoughtful adults wrestling with impossible decisions. Quotes circulate endlessly polished into moral soundbites. We need to get this right. We owe it to humanity to be careful. This technology is too important to rush. The irony is almost elegant. Each statement sounds like a break, even as everything continues to accelerate. Words of caution become part of the momentum, not resistance to it. The warning itself becomes proof of virtue. Media outlets help elevate the myth. Long-form interviews frame these figures as reluctant heroes of progress, people dragged forward by competition and inevitability rather than ambition. When contradictions are mentioned, they're softened into balance. Yes, there are risks, but also incredible opportunities, as if the same people defining both sides of the equation isn't worth lingering on. The myth also relies on comparison. These leaders are constantly positioned against a vague threat, irresponsible competitors, rogue actors, foreign labs operating without restraint. In this framing, slowing down isn't really an option, because if we don't build it, someone worse will. Fear is redirected outward, away from the builders and toward imagined alternatives that make their control seem like the safest choice available. This narrative is powerful because it flatters the audience. We are invited to believe we're witnessing a rare moment of honesty from people in power. That, unlike politicians or corporations of the past, these leaders are telling us uncomfortable truths. The admission of danger feels like transparency even when it never translates into restraint. Saying the right things replaces doing the hard ones. The mythology deepens through repetition. Every hearing, every interview, every op-ed reinforces the same roles: guardians, experts, responsible stewards of a force too complex for outsiders to question meaningfully. Skepticism is reframed as ignorance. Doubt becomes emotional. Trust becomes rational. And slowly, the boundaries shift. Questioning intention starts to feel inappropriate. After all, didn't they warn us? Didn't they ask for regulation? Didn't they admit the risks? The myth turns accountability into immunity. If you acknowledge the danger loudly enough, you are forgiven for continuing anyway. This is how authority is laundered through concern, how power disguises itself as responsibility. The public image doesn't deny the risks of AI, it owns them, controls them, narrates them. And in doing so, it positions the builders not as subjects of scrutiny, but as the only ones qualified to explain why scrutiny shouldn't slow anything down. But myths are fragile things. They depend on selective memory and careful framing, and the moment someone stops listening to the words and starts following the incentives, the story begins to crack. Because behind the language of responsibility, something far more concrete is driving every decision. And once that comes into focus, the heroic narrative starts to look less like wisdom and more like strategy. Once you stop listening to the speeches and start following the timelines, the story changes tone. Product roadmaps don't pause for ethical reflection. Investment announcements don't wait for regulatory clarity. Funding rounds close valuations, climb partnerships, expand, all while public warnings about danger grow louder. The message says slow down, but the machinery beneath it never touches the brakes. Look closely at when these warnings appear. They often surface at moments of consolidation when a handful of companies are racing to lock in dominance. Fear becomes a tool not to stop progress, but to shape who controls it. By framing AI as too dangerous for amateurs, too complex for outsiders, the narrative quietly argues that only the biggest players should be trusted to build it. Regulation is welcomed, but only the kind that raises barriers high enough to keep competitors out. The language itself does a lot of work. Existential risk sounds abstract, distant, almost philosophical. It points attention toward hypothetical futures rather than immediate consequences. Job displacement becomes a footnote. Surveillance becomes innovation. Data extraction becomes optimization. While everyone debates whether AI might one day destroy humanity, far fewer people question how it is already reshaping power, labor, and inequality right now. Behind closed doors, the incentives are brutally simple. Speed wins markets. Scale wins influence. Whoever embeds their systems first becomes infrastructure, and infrastructure is almost impossible to dislodge. In that context, public concern isn't a contradiction, it's cover. It buys time, credibility, and leverage while expansion continues unchecked. Saying this is dangerous sounds responsible even when it functions as a distraction from this is profitable. There's also a subtler maneuver at play. By positioning themselves as worried insiders, these leaders preempt criticism. If something goes wrong later, they can point back to the warnings. We told you this was risky. Responsibility dissolves into foresight. Blame is redistributed across society for not reacting correctly, not regulating fast enough, not listening carefully enough. The builders become witnesses to their own creations, not owners of the consequences. And then there's the illusion of choice. Consumers are told adoption is optional, while workplaces, schools, and governments integrate AI systems by default. Opting out becomes impractical, then impossible. The technology spreads not because everyone agrees with it, but because resisting it feels like standing in front of a moving train. Fear doesn't stop the rollout, it makes it feel inevitable. What's rarely acknowledged is how well this strategy works. The more alarming the warnings sound, the more attention they attract. Attention drives influence. Influence shapes policy. Policy, when written by those already in power, tends to protect incumbents. The cycle feeds itself, elegant and self-reinforcing, all while presenting itself as caution. So when we're told these contradictions are just the price of progress, it's worth asking who's paying that price and who's collecting it. Because beneath the moral language and grave expressions lies a very old story. Power expanding, justifying itself by claiming there is no safer alternative. And once you see that pattern, it becomes harder to believe this is all about protecting humanity. It starts to look more like protecting position. This contradiction doesn't exist in a vacuum. It fits neatly into a broader pattern that modern audiences have already been trained to accept. We live in a culture where those with the most power are also the ones most trusted to warn us about its dangers. Tech leaders caution us about addiction while designing more addictive systems. Platforms speak about misinformation while profiting from engagement spikes driven by outrage. AI is simply the most polished version of this formula so far. What makes the AI narrative especially effective is how it taps into collective anxiety, economic instability, job insecurity, a general sense that society is moving faster than anyone can control. Warnings about artificial intelligence don't create these fears, they absorb them. AI becomes a symbol for everything people already feel slipping out of reach. And when fear is this diffuse, whoever names it gets to frame it. That framing has consequences. By focusing attention on distant, abstract risks, the conversation drifts away from immediate questions of power. Who owns the data? Who decides how these systems are deployed? Who benefits when efficiency replaces workers or when prediction replaces judgment? These are concrete issues, but they don't carry the cinematic weight of extinction-level threats so they remain secondary, quietly sidelined by a more dramatic story. The audience, meanwhile, is placed in a passive role. We are invited to worry, to debate, to speculate, but rarely to intervene. Regulation is discussed as something happening somewhere else by people already embedded in the industry. Public concern becomes a mood, not a mechanism. Participation is reduced to commentary, not control. This is how technological power normalizes itself, not by denying its risks, but by narrating them so thoroughly that resistance feels redundant. If the danger is acknowledged, discussed, and endlessly debated, then progress can continue under the banner of transparency. The appearance of openness replaces actual accountability. And perhaps the most revealing part is how familiar this all feels. We've seen this cycle before, just with different tools. The promise of transformation, the warning of unintended consequences, the reassurance that those in charge are aware, thoughtful, and working on it. History suggests otherwise. Awareness rarely slows momentum. Profit rarely waits for ethics to catch up. AI didn't invent this dynamic. It inherited it. What's new is the scale, the speed, and the sophistication with which fear itself is now integrated into the rollout. Concern is no longer an obstacle. It's part of the launch strategy. And once fear becomes a feature rather than a warning sign, the final question isn't whether AI will change society. It's who gets to decide how and who gets to say it was unavoidable. In the end, the strangest part of the AI conversation isn't the technology itself, it's the performance surrounding it. We're warned about systems that could reshape humanity by the very people racing to reshape it first. Fear is presented as wisdom, urgency is framed as responsibility, and inevitability is sold as if it were a natural law rather than a series of choices made behind closed doors. The real lesson here isn't that artificial intelligence is harmless or that concern is fake. It's that power has learned how to speak the language of caution without ever slowing down. By admitting the danger, it neutralizes criticism. By acknowledging risk, it claims moral high ground. And by continuing anyway, it ensures the future arrives on its own terms. So the next time you hear a warning about AI ending humanity, listen carefully to what comes next. Look for the product announcement, the funding round, the quiet assumption that there is no alternative path, no meaningful pause, no real debate left to have. Ask who benefits from the fear and who is expected to adapt to it. Because in this version of the future, concern doesn't stop the machine, it lubricates it. And the most dangerous illusion of all isn't that AI might destroy us, it's that we were never given a choice in how it was built. That's the irony hiding in plain sight. We're told to be afraid, but encouraged to comply. And somehow we're expected to believe those two things don't contradict each other. The warning was never the message. The rollout was.